In tonight's episode, we have two stories to share. Two stories that unravel in places most people would never dare to step into. The first takes us deep into the shadow of South Korea. A place where silence speaks louder than screams. A place that no longer stands but continues to haunt those who ever dared to enter it. This is the story of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital, once called one of the most haunted places in the world. They say the asylum shut its doors in the mid-90s with no warning. Patients began dying under circumstances no one could explain, and then one night the staff simply vanished, leaving everything behind. Beds still made, charts still open, IV bags swaying gently in the stale air, as if time had stopped mid-sentence. Urban explorers who crept inside years later described endless corridors where paint peeled like shedding skin and water dripped steadily like footsteps following them. Cameras failed without reason. Batteries drained within minutes. And then there was room 402. The door no one could open. The door that rattled from the inside as though something trapped was begging to be let out. The building may be gone now, but the fear it left behind still lingers. And tonight, we step back inside. On a cold autumn night in the early 2000s, a young man named Jiune decided to test his courage. He was 23, restless, and always searching for something that would make him feel alive. His friends called him reckless, his parents called him foolish, but Jiune called himself curious. That curiosity was the very reason he found himself staring at the rusted gates of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital. The hospital sat on the edge of Gwangju City, not far from Seoul. Surrounded by dark forest and steep hills, the building loomed like a concrete skeleton. Even though it had been abandoned for years, the fences were still marked with faded warning signs. Keep out. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But that didn't stop people like Jiune, who had read stories online about the place. He wanted to see it for himself. Not just the crumbling walls and broken windows, but the truth behind the rumors. The plan was simple. He would spend a few hours inside exploring each floor and documenting what he saw with his camera. If he was lucky, he might even prove the legends wrong, or at least get footage to impress his friends. But as he stood at the gates, with the wind cutting through the trees, something already felt wrong. The silence was too heavy, too unnatural. The forest should have been alive with the sound of insects and distant dogs barking. Instead, there was nothing, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Jiune pushed the gate open with a groan of rusted metal and stepped inside. The path to the main entrance was littered with fallen branches and cracked cement patches. Every window above him seemed to watch as he approached. The building was massive, 4 stories high, with its walls grey and streaked from rain. Some windows were smashed, others boarded up, yet he could see faint shadows inside, though he knew the hospital was empty. When he finally reached the entrance doors, he found them chained shut. So he circled the building until he discovered a side door bent off its hinges. The stench of mold and rot poured out at him the moment he stepped through. It was the smell of waterlogged wood and something else, something sour and metallic, like dried blood. He raised his camera and pressed record. The tiny red light blinked back at him, steady and confident. The inside of Gonjiam was worse than the pictures he had seen online. Long hallways stretched endlessly into darkness. Paint peeled from the walls in thick curls, like the building was shedding its own skin. Broken gurneys sat in the corners, their wheels frozen in place. Doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, swaying gently as though touched by an invisible hand. And everywhere, water dripped from the ceiling, steady and rhythmic, each drop echoing down the corridor like footsteps that refused to stop. Jiune whispered to himself, a nervous laugh escaping his throat. He told the camera he was fine, but deep inside, he already felt the pressure of the building wrapping around him. His purpose was clear. He would make it to the top floor. He would find room 402, the room everyone whispered about online, the room that, according to legend, could drive a person insane if they lingered too long. He wanted proof that it was just another locked door. Yet, even as he spoke his goal aloud, the shadows around him seemed to grow heavier, as though the building itself understood what he was looking for. And in that moment, Jiune realized this was no ordinary exploration. He wasn't just stepping into a forgotten hospital, he was walking into a place where silence held secrets, and every secret was watching him. Jiune steadied his camera as he moved deeper into the hospital. The beam of his flashlight swept across crumbling walls and doorways gaping like open mouths. Each room he peeked into was filled with rusted beds, overturned chairs, and medical files scattered across the floor as if abandoned in a single panicked moment. He kept telling himself this was just a building, just concrete, steel, and dust. But something about the air made it feel alive. He reached the first stairwell, a narrow set of steps curling upward into darkness. The metal rail was cold and wet when his hand touched it, as though condensation had formed despite the dry autumn air. As he placed his foot on the first step, a sound rose above the drip, drip, drip that had been following him since he entered, a faint tapping, soft, deliberate. Almost like someone with fingernails drumming against glass, he froze, listening. Hard silence followed. Then, just when he thought it was in his imagination, the tapping came again, louder. This time from above. Jiune tilted his flashlight upward. The staircase vanished into a pitch-black void. The tapping stopped. But when he lowered the light, he noticed something else. His camera had stopped recording. The red light was gone, the lens still open, but dead. He pressed the button again. Nothing. Battery drained. He muttered under his breath, frustrated, but also unsettled. He had fully charged the camera only hours earlier before leaving home. It shouldn't have died this quickly. Shoving the useless device into his backpack, he pulled out his phone. Instead of relief, a chill rippled through him. The screen flickered, refusing to stay lit. Battery at 63%, then suddenly 42, then 20. He locked it quickly, trying to save what little power remained, and switched the flashlight back on. The beam looked weaker than before, as though even the batteries in his torch were struggling. Trying to shake it off, Jiune climbed the staircase. The second floor was darker, colder, the smell stronger here. Dust mixed with a faint chemical stench that clung to the back of his throat. He passed a row of patient rooms, their doors all slightly open. None wide enough to see inside completely, but each one dark like hollow sockets in a skull. When he pushed one door gently with his finger, it creaked inward. A hospital bed stood against the wall, sheets still tucked tight, yellowed with age. A child's shoe rested on the mattress. A single small shoe, left behind in a rush. He stepped back quickly, heart pounding. Why would a child's shoe be left in a psychiatric hospital? He didn't want to know. He pressed on, and that's when the sound returned. Not tapping this time. Something different, a dragging noise. Slow, heavy, as if something was being pulled across the floor down the hall. He froze. His flashlight beam shot forward, illuminating nothing but empty hallway. Yet the sound continued, scraping across tile. Steady and slow, coming closer. Jiune whispered to himself that it had to be water dripping or wind pushing debris, but the rhythm was too precise, too deliberate. He held his breath. The sound stopped. He waited. Every second stretched into eternity. And then something fell behind him. A loud metallic clang echoed through the stairwell. He spun the light downward. An old bedpan lay on the steps, rolling slightly before it settled. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't gone near it. His throat tightened. A thin sweat broke across his skin. He told himself to stay calm. But a thought pushed into his mind uninvited. If objects were already moving on their own, what would happen when he reached room 402? He shook his head and whispered that it was just gravity, just rust and time giving way. Yet, even as he spoke, he noticed the bedpan had rolled against the stair railing, as though placed there with intention. The dragging sound returned. Now faint again, but this time farther away, deeper in the building, as if whatever made it was leading him forward. Jiune hesitated. His rational mind screamed to leave, to get out while he still could, but his curiosity chained him to the spot. The whole purpose of his visit was to uncover the truth, and now the hospital seemed eager to show it to him. So he followed the noise, step by step, into the dark corridor of the second floor. His flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand. The further he walked, the stronger the smell became. A metallic sharpness like rust, but mixed with something organic. His chest tightened, his pace slowed. The hallway stretched endlessly, yet he felt he was being pulled towards something inevitable. And then he noticed a door on his left. Closed tight, unlike the others. A faded plaque above it with numbers almost impossible to read under the peeling paint. 402. The very room he had come to find. Yet even before he touched it, the handle shivered once, as though a hand from the other side had already reached for him. Jiune stood frozen in front of the rusted plaque, the numbers barely visible beneath years of decay. Yet he knew what it said, room 402. His chest tightened. He raised his flashlight and aimed it at the handle. The metal glistened wet like condensation, though the air was bone dry. As he reached out, the knob trembled again. A faint vibration running through it, as though something on the other side pressed back. His hand recoiled before he even realized it. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe steady. But then, another sound emerged from down the corridor. A whisper. It was faint, almost too soft to recognize at first. The kind of sound the brain wants to dismiss as air moving through cracks. But it grew clearer. A voice speaking in Korean. The words broken, stretched, like they were being dragged across the air. Jiune didn't catch all of it, but the message chilled him to the bone. Do not open it. He spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Empty hallways, rooms still and silent. But the voice had been clear. Someone or something had warned him. He tried to convince himself it was just an echo. Maybe graffiti hunters outside. Shaking his head, he stepped back from room 402 and pressed forward down the corridor. He thought maybe he could circle around, find another way in. Yet the deeper he went, the heavier the air became. His flashlight flickered, dimmer with each step. Then he heard footsteps, not his own. They were soft, cautious, as if someone was trying not to be heard. He held his breath and pressed himself against the wall, listening. The steps grew louder, approaching from the far end of the corridor. His pulse hammered in his ears. He raised the flashlight beam and shouted, "Hello, who's there?" The light caught movement. A figure at the end of the hall, barely visible in the shadows, a man wearing what looked like a hospital gown, the fabric tattered, stained. His posture slouched, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Jiune froze. A patient. He thought for a moment maybe another explorer in costume, but the way the figure moved was wrong. Each step dragged, like bones grinding against the floor. The man's face lifted just enough for the light to catch hollow eyes. Sockets dark, like empty wells. Jiune stumbled back, nearly dropping his flashlight. He blinked once, twice, and the figure was gone. The corridor stood empty again. His breath clouded in front of him, though the air wasn't cold anymore. He muttered to himself, trying to regain control. He couldn't tell if his mind was breaking under the tension or if something inside the hospital wanted him to see what it remembered. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a sharp vibration that made him jolt. He pulled it out, hoping maybe one of his friends had messaged him, but the screen lit up with something impossible. A notification he had never seen before. A calendar reminder written in Korean text he hadn't set. It read, "They never left." He stared at it, the glow illuminating his pale face. The phone buzzed again, but this time the screen went black, completely dead. The words burned in his memory. Panic gnawed at him. He turned back toward the stairwell, intent on leaving, but when he reached it, the path down was gone. The stairwell swallowed by darkness so complete his flashlight couldn't pierce it. He aimed the beam downward only to see it bounce back, as if the light itself refused to travel beyond the first few steps. He whispered out loud that he just needed to find another exit. He retraced his steps, moving quickly now. Each hallway looked the same, peeling paint, gurneys overturned, doors ajar. He passed the same broken window twice, though he swore he had taken a different path. The building was folding in on him, rearranging itself to keep him inside. His chest tightened. He felt as though he was being led back toward room 402, no matter which turn he chose. And sure enough, as he rounded the final corner, there it was again. The same closed door, the same trembling handle. Only now, scrawled across the wall in what looked like charcoal, or perhaps dried blood, were the words, "Leave her alone." The writing was frantic, uneven, smeared, as if written in haste. Jihun's hand shook as he traced the letters without touching them. A second warning. This one not just about the door, but about someone behind it. The hospital was no longer just abandoned walls. It had become a trap. A place that wanted him to see, to hear, to obey. And every sign pointed back to room 402. Jihun's hands trembled as he lowered the flashlight beam back to the words on the wall. Leave her alone. The letters looked fresh, darker in some places, as if whatever had written them had not yet dried. He whispered to himself that it couldn't be possible. No one had been here for years. The place was sealed, condemned, demolished in every report he had read online. Yet here he stood, staring at a message that seemed written only moments before. He turned to the door of room 402. The handle rattled again. This time louder, more violent, as though something on the other side knew he was standing there and wanted him to acknowledge it. He staggered back, chest pounding, but his feet felt locked in place. He couldn't move. He couldn't leave. Then the voice returned. The same stretched whisper that had warned him before. Only now it wasn't faint. It was right next to his ear. Do not open it. The words sliced through the silence like a blade. Jihun spun to his left, flashlight jerking wildly. Empty hallway. Nothing but peeling paint and black doorways. But the whisper hadn't been in his head. It had breathed against his skin. Before he could process it, another sound erupted. A slam, violent and echoing. One of the doors down the corridor flew open, banging against the wall so hard the hinges shrieked. His flashlight cut across the room, but there was nothing inside. Just another bed, another broken chair. Yet the slam still reverberated through the walls like a living heartbeat. Jihun's instinct screamed to run. He forced himself to turn, intending to retreat toward the stairwell again, but his light froze on something at the far end of the corridor. A shadow standing perfectly still. At first he thought it was another doorway, but then the outline moved. It shifted forward one slow step, then another. A tall figure, a woman, her hospital gown torn, dragging against the floor as she shuffled. His throat closed. He raised the flashlight higher, illuminating her face. But there was nothing there, no features, just a blur, where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. As the light touched her, she convulsed violently, twitching in unnatural jerks, like a puppet strung up and shaken by unseen hands. A low moan escaped her, vibrating through the hall until Jihun felt it in his bones. He backed away, but the figure followed, step after agonizing step, her movements slow but relentless, her faceless head turning toward him with each shuffle. He shouted at her to stay back, his voice trembling, but it came out weak, swallowed by the weight of the building. Then, as if responding, the door to room 402 rattled with violent force. The metal groaned. Dust rained from the frame. It sounded like fists pounding from the inside, desperate, furious. Jihun's knees buckled. The hallway was alive with sound. Moans, banging, whispers, scraping. He couldn't tell what was real anymore. He turned in panic and sprinted toward the opposite end of the hallway. His footsteps echoed, mingling with the dragging steps behind him. He didn't dare look back. Every cell in his body screamed that she was chasing him. He reached the end of the hall and burst into another stairwell. Relief hit him for a second, an escape. But when he looked down, the stairs spiraled endlessly into blackness. No ground in sight, no bottom to reach. He screamed in frustration, his flashlight trembling as he pulled it away, and that's when he saw it. Another figure standing halfway down the stairwell, illuminated just faintly by the glow of his light. It was the same faceless woman, her head tilted upward now, staring at him without eyes. His stomach lurched. If she was here, who or what was following him in the hall? His breath came ragged. He backed out of the stairwell, nearly tripping over himself, and returned to the hallway. It was silent again, too silent. He dared to glance over his shoulder. The corridor was empty, no woman, no figure, no dragging sound. Just the door of room 402, rattling softly, like a heartbeat waiting to sync with his. Jihun's chest burned. He couldn't breathe. He pressed his hand to the wall, steadying himself. And then he noticed it. His palm smeared across something wet. He pulled it back and stared. Blood. Thick and fresh, dripping down the cracked paint of the wall. He staggered backward in horror. His mind spun. Where had it come from? The hallway lights, long dead for decades, sputtered, a flicker, a hum, then one after another, bulbs snapped to life, glowing faint yellow down the length of the corridor. The sudden light revealed what Jiune had feared most. The hallway was no longer empty. Figures stood in every doorway, half shrouded in shadow, their heads tilted, faces blank or distorted. Patients, dozens of them, their gowns torn, their postures twisted as if frozen mid-scream. Jiune stumbled backward until his spine pressed against the trembling door of room 402. The figures didn't move. They just stared, their hollow sockets fixed on him. His flashlight shook violently in his grip, the beam scattering across their bodies, but no matter where he pointed, their eyes never left him. Then all at once, the whispers began, not one, but many. Overlapping voices rising and falling, words Jiune couldn't make out, but every syllable soaked in warning and grief. His heart pounded. His body felt like it was being crushed by the weight of all those unseen eyes. The door behind him shook harder now, the rattling violent, shaking the frame. Jiune gasped. He couldn't move, couldn't run. He was trapped between the faceless crowd and whatever clawed desperately at the door. And then, without warning, the handle turned on its own. A sharp click echoed through the hall. Jihune's knees weakened. His flashlight beam slid down to the handle, now slowly twisting, inch by inch, until it pointed downward. The door creaked open just a fraction. Cold air rushed out, smelling of rust and decay so sharp it stung his eyes. From the crack, a hand reached out. Thin, grey, fingers impossibly long, nails jagged like broken glass. It stretched toward Jihune's chest, trembling with unnatural hunger. Every figure in the hall moaned at once, their voices rising to a deafening wail. The lights above burst in a shower of sparks, plunging everything into darkness. Jiune screamed, but the sound drowned beneath the roar of voices and the scraping of nails dragging against the doorframe. He realized in that instant there was no escaping. The hospital didn't want him to leave. It wanted him to open the door, or worse, to be pulled inside. Jihune's scream cut through the dark, but the sound seemed to die in his throat, swallowed by the walls around him. His flashlight had slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor, the beam landing crookedly against the opposite wall. The thin grey hand from inside room 402 stretched further through the crack in the door, its nails scraping deep gouges into the frame. Jiune pressed himself flat against the wall, heart pounding, but before the hand could reach him, something unexpected happened. The voices. The dozens of overlapping whispers he had been drowning in suddenly shifted. They no longer moaned in torment. They spoke in unison, low and urgent, like a choir begging him to understand. The words were broken, hard to make out, but Jiune caught fragments in Korean. Don't let it out. Don't release her. Don't. He froze. Her. The writing on the wall had warned him. Leave her alone. The whispers weren't just trying to scare him. They were trying to stop him. His thoughts spiraled back through everything that had happened since stepping into the building. The drained batteries, the dragging sounds leading him deeper, the figure in the hallway with no face. The bloody message scrawled across the wall. They weren't random acts of terror, they were warnings. The building wasn't trying to lure him in. It was trying to keep him away from room 402. Jihune's breath caught as the realization struck him. What if the legends were true? What if the reason the hospital shut down so suddenly, the reason patients died one after another, wasn't a failing of medicine or corruption or negligence? What if it was her? The door behind him rattled again, furious, violent. Dust shook from the ceiling. That thin hand scraped back into the darkness, but not in retreat, in preparation. Jiune heard the nails tapping on the inside of the door, like a predator sharpening its claws before it struck. The whispers rose, sharper now, demanding, Don't. Jihune's chest tightened. His rational mind screamed at him to flee, to run back through the halls and out of the hospital, no matter if the stairwell twisted endlessly or the windows repeated themselves. Yet his legs wouldn't move. The fear was paralyzing, but so was the need to know. The reason every explorer had spoken of room 402 wasn't just because it was locked. It was because something behind it wanted to be freed. He thought back to the lone shoe he had seen on the hospital bed, the small, forgotten shoe of a child. He thought of the figure in the gown, with no face, twitching like a puppet. What if these were the ones trapped here? Not haunting the hospital, but bound to it. Their warnings weren't to scare him. They were desperate pleas to keep the door sealed. The whispering chorus suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, Jiune could hear one voice rise above the rest. A single woman's voice, faint but clear, bleeding through the crack in the door. It didn't whisper like the others. It begged, "Help me." The words pierced him like a blade. They were filled with sorrow, agony, a desperate need for release. He stared at the door, lips trembling. The warnings, the figures, the messages scrawled on the walls, they all said don't. But here, at the very heart of it all, was someone begging him to do the opposite, to open the door, to let her out. Jihun's mind raced. Were the ghosts of the hospital lying to him, desperate to keep their torment hidden by disguising it as a warning? Or was the voice behind the door lying instead, using pity as its weapon, luring him closer with a promise of helplessness? He leaned closer to the crack, heart hammering in his throat. The woman's voice came again, softer this time, almost sweet. "Please, I've been here so long. Let me out." His hand rose without him realizing it. Fingers stretched toward the handle. And yet, beneath the plea, he thought he heard something else. A distortion. A sound like growling, too low to be human. He froze. The voice had shifted again. Still soft, still begging, but underneath something darker coiled. The faceless figures in the hallway twitched in the shadows. They didn't move forward. They didn't vanish. They only stood there, their heads jerking, as if locked in eternal struggle. Jiune understood then. They weren't just trapped. They were guards. Not keeping something out, but keeping something in. The writing on the wall flashed through his mind. "Leave her alone." Jiune stumbled back, wrenching his hand away from the door. His body trembled violently, sweat running cold down his face. He realized that every moment since he'd entered the hospital had been about this. The drained batteries, the repeating hallways, the visions, the voices, they had been building to this decision. One choice, to open the door or leave it sealed forever. And in that instant, Jiune understood the truth that reframed everything he thought he knew. The hospital hadn't been abandoned. It hadn't simply collapsed under scandal or fear. It had been shut down to lock something inside room 402, something that had once been human, perhaps a patient, a woman, but had become something else entirely. Something that needed to be contained. The deaths, the sudden abandonment, the staff leaving in the middle of the night. It wasn't panic, it wasn't failure, it was sacrifice. A desperate act to trap her before she escaped. Jihune's hands shook violently. He backed away from the door, every instinct screaming now not to touch it, not to listen, not to free her. The whispers around him rose once again, louder, insistent, pushing him toward the decision he already knew was right. The voice behind the door screamed suddenly, no longer sorrowful, no longer sweet. A shriek so sharp it cracked through the walls and rattled the floor beneath him. It wasn't the cry of a woman begging for freedom. It was the roar of something furious at being denied. Jiune clamped his hands over his ears, stumbling back, but the scream still pierced through his skull, vibrating through his teeth. He collapsed to his knees, flashlight rolling uselessly across the floor. When the scream finally died, silence filled the hall once again. His chest heaved, his ears rang, but the truth remained carved into his mind. The asylum had never been haunted in the way people believed. It was haunted because of room 402, and room 402 was never supposed to be opened. Jiune staggered to his feet, every muscle in his body trembling. The whispers had faded, the faceless figures were gone, but the door still stood behind him, silent, waiting. He didn't dare turn his back on it for long, but he knew if he stayed another second, he would lose his nerve completely. He snatched up his flashlight and sprinted down the corridor, ignoring the way the walls seemed to bend and shift with every step. His lungs burned, his legs shook, but he didn't stop. He reached the stairwell, the same one that had seemed endless before, and this time the beam of his light finally showed a bottom. The darkness had lifted. The hospital was letting him leave. He barreled down the stairs, through the halls, past the side door, and burst into the cold night air. He collapsed on the cracked pavement outside, gasping, staring up at the silhouette of the building. The windows looked empty again. No faces, no shadows, no whispers, just a dead husk of a hospital. Yet, as he sat there shaking, he knew it wasn't over, because even as the silence of the forest returned, Jihun's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands, terrified of what he would see. The screen flickered once, then lit up with a single notification. A calendar reminder. It read, "She is out." Jihun dropped the phone as if it had burned him. His eyes shot back to the building, but the door he had left behind was still closed, still sealed, wasn't it? The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it what sounded like a woman's laugh. Soft at first, then echoing everywhere. Jihun stumbled back toward the road, unable to look behind him again. He didn't know if he had escaped. He didn't know if the warnings had saved him, or if he had already unleashed what the hospital had tried so desperately to contain. What he did know was this: Gonjiam may have been demolished, but whatever lived in room 402 had not been buried with it. And now, it was free. The story of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital leaves us with a chilling reminder that some doors are never meant to be opened. But that warning doesn't end in South Korea. Because just across the waters, in Indonesia, stands another place where doors hold secrets too dark to name. Lawang Sewu, the Thousand Doors, is a building whose beauty hides a brutal history. Endless corridors, arches that seem to repeat forever, and beneath it all, a basement soaked with echoes of war and torture. Where Gonjiam locked away something unseen, Lawang Sewu locked away human suffering itself. And for those who dare descend into its flooded prison, the question isn't just what happened there, it's whether the doors you choose to open are the ones you'll be able to walk back out of. In the heart of Semarang, Indonesia, sits a building so grand, so beautiful in daylight, that tourists often mistake it for nothing more than a relic of colonial history. Lawang Sewu, the Thousand Doors. Its wide arches, towering windows, and endless corridors make it look like a palace pulled from another time. But once the sun sets, beauty turns to menace, and those same doors whisper promises that not every visitor dares to hear. For Arif, a university student obsessed with local legends, Lawang Sewu wasn't just a landmark, it was a challenge. Stories of ghosts and shadows had filled his childhood, tales whispered by his grandmother who swore that voices lingered in the flooded basement. He had always laughed them off, until now. Armed with a flashlight, a borrowed thermal camera, and the reckless determination of someone too curious for his own good, Arif decided to see the truth with his own eyes. It was near midnight when he arrived. The streets around the compound were silent, the war memorial outside dimly lit by a single flickering lamp. Arif paused there, staring at the monument to fallen soldiers. Their names were carved into stone, but all he could think about were the names that never made it onto any memorial. The prisoners who had been dragged into the underground rooms of Lawang Sewu during the war, shackled, tortured, and executed in silence. The main building loomed over him, its 1,000 doors lined like sentinels. No matter where he stood, it seemed every door and window was watching. He told himself it was only architecture, just clever Dutch design, but the feeling of being observed only grew stronger as he stepped through the entrance. His goal was clear. He would find Building B. He would go down into the basement, the place whispered about in every urban legend, and he would capture proof of what lay there. Inside, the air felt thick, humid, heavy with age. The wooden floors creaked under his weight, echoing through the long halls. Moonlight spilled through arched windows, casting shadows that stretched like reaching arms. The sound of water dripping somewhere below teased him, reminding him of the basement he had yet to face. His footsteps echoed strangely, bouncing back at him in ways that didn't make sense. Sometimes the echo was too quick, as if another step had followed his. As he explored, he passed rows of doors, each one identical, tall, arched, painted white, but stained with time. Some stood slightly open, others sealed tight. He had read that Lawang Sewu's design was meant to keep the building cool, but walking through it felt like being lost inside a labyrinth. It was impossible to tell which doors led to new corridors and which simply circled back to where he began. Arif paused at one door in particular, slightly ajar, with faint light seeping out from behind it. He leaned forward, holding his breath, but when he pushed it open, it revealed nothing but an empty office. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. He let out a shaky laugh, telling himself he was already jumping at shadows. But the unease didn't fade. Every step deeper into Lawang Sewu felt heavier, like the building was pulling him further inside. He muttered to the camera that this was just history, just walls and water. Yet part of him couldn't shake the feeling that the walls weren't just holding history, they were holding memory. And memory, here, was alive. Finally, he reached the staircase to the basement. The air changed immediately. Damp, cold. The smell of mold and stagnant water hit him hard, mixed with something metallic that turned his stomach. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and forced a grin for the camera, whispering that this was it, the place everyone talked about. The place where the 1,000 doors no longer led to offices or halls, but to darkness. Arif had come searching for proof. He wanted to laugh at the legends. But as he stood at the top of the stairs, listening to the faint splash of water echoing up from below, something in his gut told him he wasn't going down there alone. Arif steadied himself at the top of the staircase. The beam of his flashlight bounced across slick stone steps that disappeared into black water below. The smell of mildew and rust filled his nose, thick and suffocating. He told the camera he wasn't afraid, that this was just another basement in just another old building, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. The first step down sent a splash echoing up the walls. His shoe sank into icy water that rose above his ankles. He winced at the cold and pressed forward, each step louder than the last. The basement was partly submerged, just as he had read. But the stories online hadn't mentioned how the water would distort every sound. Every drip, every shift, echoed endlessly, bouncing from wall to wall like whispers. At the bottom, he swung his flashlight in a wide arc. The beam caught the outlines of rusted shackles bolted to the walls, the metal corroded but still strong. He whispered to himself that this was the real evidence of history, not just ghost stories. Prisoners had been chained here, tortured, executed. The building didn't need spirits to be terrifying. The past was enough. He waded further, water rising to his shins, ripples spreading across the black surface with every movement. Then he froze. Another ripple broke across the water, but this one didn't come from him. It came from the far end of the basement, where his light couldn't reach. He held his breath, silence. Then another ripple, closer this time. Arif turned the thermal camera on, pointing it toward the far wall. For a moment, nothing registered. Just the cold, blank blue of stone. But then, a figure appeared. A faint, human shape standing waist-deep in the water. It didn't move, didn't wade closer. It just stood there, as though watching him. Arif's throat tightened. He whispered to the camera that it must be a glitch, maybe a heat reflection or a shadow bouncing off the water. He flicked the camera off and back on. The figure was still there, only now it was closer. He stumbled back, his footsteps sending loud splashes into the air. The figure vanished. The screen showed only water again. Arif laughed nervously, forcing his voice steady, insisting it was just interference. But his hands shook. As he turned back toward the stairs, he heard it, footsteps. Not splashes like his own, but heavier. A dragging step, then another, the water churning in a rhythm that didn't belong to him. He froze, swinging his flashlight wildly. Nothing. Just ripples dancing on the surface. Hello? His voice cracked in the silence. Is someone here? The only answer was a low humming. A voice, distant yet close, vibrating through the water. It sounded like a chant, rising and falling without words he could understand. The sound seemed to seep out of the walls themselves, reverberating inside his chest. He clutched the camera tighter, whispering that it was just pipes, just the old building settling. But he knew better. Then came the shadows. At first he thought it was just his light catching the water strangely, but when he steadied the beam he saw it clearly, a reflection in the rippling surface, a human figure standing directly behind him. His breath caught. He spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. Empty air. But the water rippled outward from a point just inches away from where he stood, as though something had been there only a moment ago. Arif's confidence cracked. He stumbled toward the stairs, water splashing loudly. The humming grew louder, closer, as if following him. And then, halfway back to the steps, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A door. Set low against the far wall, half submerged in black water, its wooden frame swollen with moisture. It hadn't been mentioned in the maps he'd studied, nor the guides he'd read. The basement was supposed to be one open chamber. Yet here was a door, silent and waiting, the dark water lapping against its edges. Arif's flashlight flickered as he aimed it at the wood. The humming stopped, complete silence. His chest tightened as a new question formed in his mind, one heavier than any legend he had heard. If Lawang Sewu truly had 1,000 doors, which ones were never meant to be opened? And why was this one hidden beneath the water, waiting for him to find it? Arif stood frozen in the waist-deep water, staring at the swollen wooden door half submerged at the far end of the basement. The silence pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The humming had stopped the moment he noticed the door, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. He whispered into the camera that he had discovered something undocumented, something no tourist or guidebook mentioned. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The words didn't sound like triumph, they sounded like a warning to himself. He inched closer, flashlight beam trembling across the surface of the water. Every step stirred ripples, yet he couldn't shake the sensation that other ripples moved against him, as though something unseen was pushing through the water in the opposite direction. When he reached the door, he crouched slightly, running the light across its surface. The wood was dark, swollen and scarred with deep scratches, long grooves dragged downward, as if something inside had clawed to get out. His chest tightened. He reached out with shaking fingers, not to touch it, but to trace the air just above it. The door didn't rattle, didn't move. But the water at its base shifted unnaturally, pulling toward it in tiny currents, as though it were breathing. Arif staggered back, muttering that this was too much, that he should leave. He turned toward the staircase, but before he could move, a splash echoed from behind him. He whipped around. The door remained closed, the water stilled. Yet now, painted across the damp wall beside the door, was writing. Black, dripping letters slowly appearing as though etched by invisible hands. The words formed in shaky strokes, but clear enough to read. Don't open what was closed in blood. Arif's heart pounded in his chest. He shone the light across the wall, desperate to see how the words had appeared, but nothing moved. Only stagnant water reflected his shaking beam. He stumbled back further, whispering to himself that he needed to get out. But the building disagreed. From the shadows of the basement, the humming returned. Louder this time, not one voice but many, layered and overlapping, rising into an eerie chant. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, above him, behind him, inside the water itself. His camera screen flickered, and for a brief second, a cluster of glowing figures appeared on the thermal display. Dozens of them, standing waist-deep, surrounding him in a circle. He spun in panic, but the flashlight revealed nothing. Just water, shackles, and stone. He shouted into the dark, demanding to know who was there. His voice echoed back, distorted, only it wasn't just his echo. A second voice overlapped his own, mimicking him a split second too late, deeper, heavier. He clutched his chest, terror spiking. Someone, or something, was repeating him. Then, as if to confirm it, a splash erupted just a few feet away. Water churned violently, as though an unseen figure had stepped forward. He stumbled back until his spine pressed against the slick wall. His light flickered, barely holding on. In its dying glow, he saw something that made his blood run cold. At the base of the water, a reflection, his reflection, but it didn't move with him. His head tilted left, the reflection tilted right. His breath came ragged, shallow, as he realized the water was showing him something else entirely, something using his shape, but not him. The chant grew louder, pounding in his ears. The words no longer sounded meaningless. They were clearer now, in fragments of Indonesian. Don't trust the doors. Don't follow the reflection. Arif's throat went dry. The warning scraped into the wall, the chants in the water, the reflection mocking him. They weren't trying to scare him, they were trying to keep him away from the door. Yet, Even as he understood that, the water beneath the door began to boil, bubbles rising to the surface. A new sound erupted then, not humming, not chanting, knocking. From inside the swollen wooden door, 3 sharp knocks, followed by silence. His flashlight died with a soft click, plunging him into total darkness. In the blackness, he heard one last thing. A whisper, this time not in chant, not in warning, but right at his ear. A woman's voice, soft and cold. You came to find me. Arif's legs nearly gave out. He understood then, Lawang Sewu's 1,000 doors weren't just endless corridors of stone and arches. Some doors were never meant to be found. And somehow, he had found one. The darkness in the basement of Lawang Sewu pressed against Arif like a living thing. His flashlight had died completely, and the faint glow of his camera screen was gone too, leaving him with nothing but the sound of water lapping against his legs. His breath came in ragged bursts, each inhale sharp and shallow. Somewhere behind him, the 1,000 doors of the building seemed to creak in unison, as though the entire structure was exhaling around him. He wanted to move, to run back toward the staircase, but his legs felt locked in place. The last words he had heard still rang in his ears, soft and intimate, a woman's voice that had no business being there. You came to find me. The water rippled. A splash echoed, not from him, but from somewhere close. He froze. Another splash, closer still, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving through the flooded room. Heavy, deliberate, each step sloshed forward with a weight far greater than his own. Arif forced his shaking hands to fumble for the camera, hoping its thermal lens would at least give him a shape to understand. The screen flickered, static rolling across it before forming an image. His stomach dropped. Figures, dozens of them. They filled the room, standing motionless in the water, their heads bowed, their arms slack at their sides. He panned the camera slowly, heart hammering as he counted. 10, 15, 20. And in the center, just beyond the half-submerged wooden door, stood another figure. Taller. Still. Its outline brighter than the rest, as if radiating heat that shouldn't have existed in the damp, icy chamber. Arif whispered to himself that it couldn't be real, that the water, the heat, the ghosts, everything was tricking the equipment. But then the camera caught something worse. The central figure moved. Not forward, not sideways. It rose, slowly, unnaturally, lifting higher above the water until it towered above the rest. The screen flashed red and then went black. The camera in his hands went dead, joining the flashlight. He was blind. Then came the knock. 3 sharp pounds from inside the swollen door at his back. The sound was so loud it shook the walls, sent vibrations through the water. Dust fell from the ceiling in small clouds, and a shackle on the far wall clattered as if pulled. Arif's chest tightened so hard he thought he might faint. He spun blindly toward the stairs, but his foot struck something beneath the water. He stumbled, splashing loudly, hands clawing at the wall to steady himself. His fingers brushed against stone, and then something else. Cold metal, shackles. The cuff clamped around his wrist with a sudden snap. Arif screamed, thrashing in panic, tugging at the rusted chain that held him. The metal cut into his skin, unyielding. He pulled with all his weight, but it only tightened further, locking him to the wall. And then the humming returned. Not distant this time, not hidden. It rose directly behind the door, a chorus of voices, thick and guttural, pushing against the wood like a tide. The water boiled at his feet. His vision blurred with tears and sweat. He yanked at the chain until his wrist bled. The door knocked again, harder. Splinters cracked from the frame. The wood bulged outward as if something massive was slamming against it from the other side. The faceless figures appeared again, not in the camera, but in reality. The faint outline of bodies shimmered in the water, rising slowly around him. He saw them now, pale and translucent, their faces twisted in agony, their mouths opened in silent screams as they raised their arms, pointing all at once toward the door. Arif's heart nearly stopped. They weren't warning him anymore. They were pleading for him not to let it out. But the voice came again, cutting through the chaos, soft, feminine, impossibly close. Help me. The words wrapped around him like chains, pulling tighter than the shackle on his wrist. He gasped, torn between the begging of the faceless prisoners and the desperate cry of the woman behind the door. His mind split in two, one part screaming that he was about to unleash something monstrous, the other whispering that if he left her, he would be condemning someone to eternal torment. The door shuddered violently. Water surged forward, nearly knocking him off his feet. His flashlight flickered back to life for a split second, its beam landing on the scratches carved deep into the wood. They weren't random claw marks. They were letters. Words scratched over and over again by someone trapped inside. "Let me out." Arif's blood ran cold. He screamed at himself to stop, to resist, but his hand reached out, trembling, toward the swollen handle of the door. The whispers rose to a deafening pitch, hundreds of voices overlapping in pain and warning. His ears rang, his vision spun, and then everything stopped. The water went still, the chanting ceased, the knocking ended. Silence swallowed the basement whole. Arif froze, his hand inches from the handle. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The building itself seemed to wait with him, suspended in anticipation. Then came the sound that shattered him, the click of the lock, turning on its own. The handle moved downward, slowly, deliberately, though he hadn't touched it. The door creaked, opening a fraction. A rush of air burst through the crack, foul and suffocating, carrying with it the faintest echo of a laugh. Arif's knees gave out. He collapsed into the freezing water, staring at the widening gap in the door. And for the first time since stepping into Lawang Sewu, he wished he had never come looking for answers. Arif lay trembling in the freezing water, staring at the thin crack in the swollen wooden door. The foul air that seeped out seemed alive, curling into the chamber like black smoke he couldn't see but could feel pressing against his skin. His wrist throbbed in the shackle, blood seeping where the rust had torn him. For a moment, he thought the silence meant it was over, that maybe the danger had passed. But then, from behind the door, came a sound more unsettling than any scream. It was crying, a woman's sobs, muffled, broken, drifting through the crack. At first, they sounded human, fragile, the sobs of someone abandoned for too long. Arif's chest ached as he listened, the sound twisting into him, making him believe she was real, trapped, suffering, waiting for him. But then the sobs warped. The cadence stretched unnaturally, dragging on too long. The voice deepened for a moment, before pitching high again, like multiple throats crying together. It was human sorrow, but layered with something inhuman that slipped beneath the words. "You found me," the voice whispered between sobs. "Don't leave me here." Arif pressed his free hand against his ear, shaking his head. No, I can't." His voice cracked, half in panic, half in guilt. The faceless figures still surrounded him, their translucent bodies shimmering faintly in the dark water. They hadn't vanished. Their arms were still raised, pointing toward the door. Only now, their silent screams looked different to him. They weren't expressions of torment, they were warnings. Desperate, endless warnings. It was then he noticed the shackles lining the walls more clearly. The rusted cuffs weren't scattered randomly. They formed a pattern, a circle, as if prisoners had been chained here, not only for torture, but to serve as barriers. Their deaths hadn't ended their suffering. They had become guardians. The realization hit him like ice. The legends about the basement being used as a prison weren't wrong, but the stories had left something out. The Japanese military police hadn't just executed prisoners here. They had bound something inside, using human lives as seals to contain it. The chains weren't only for people, they were for her. Arif's breath came fast and shallow. His mind raced back through the night, reframing everything he had seen. The humming voices, the shadows in the water, the echo that mimicked his words, all of them had been attempts to keep him from reaching this door. The figures he thought were tormenting him were actually guiding him, pleading for him to stop before he went too far. The woman's voice shifted again, clearer now. "They locked me here. They feared me. But you can help me." Arif clenched his teeth, shaking his head. "No, you're lying." His voice was weak, unconvincing even to himself. The sobbing stopped, silence thickened, and when the voice returned, it no longer begged. It was calm, smooth, and filled with cold certainty. "You can't leave unless you open it." The words dug into him. He thought of the endless corridors upstairs, the way the stairwell had twisted, the doors that always led him back. The labyrinth of Lawang Sewu wasn't broken. It was designed to trap him, to funnel him here, to force him into this choice. The faceless figures stepped closer now, their pale forms rippling in the water. Arif pressed himself against the wall, shackled and helpless, but as they reached him, he realized they weren't trying to harm him. One leaned closer, its mouth opening in a silent scream just inches from his face. And in that silence, he finally understood what it was saying. Don't set her free. Tears stung his eyes as the truth carved itself into his mind. Lawang Sewu wasn't haunted in the way the legend said. It wasn't the tortured prisoners that terrified the locals, or the footsteps splashing in the basement. Those were echoes, guardians, warnings left behind by the dead. The true horror wasn't the building, it was what the building held. Behind the swollen wooden door wasn't a victim. It wasn't a ghost longing for release. It was something older, darker, that had fed on suffering and multiplied it. The prisoners chained in the basement weren't simply executed, they were sacrificed, their deaths binding the creature in place, their spirits trapped as wardens for eternity. The laughter came then, soft and sharp, curling through the crack in the door like smoke. The voice of the woman melted into something else entirely, a guttural growl beneath her sweetness. They tried to contain me, it hissed. But doors always open, eventually. Arif's chest heaved, his body trembling violently. He pulled against the shackle until his wrist split further, blood running down his arm. His mind screamed at him to flee, to never look back, but another part whispered the terrifying truth. He might already be too late. The scratches on the wood weren't desperate pleas carved by a prisoner. They were lures, bait, etched deep to draw curiosity. Let me out. Arif finally understood what every explorer before him had felt. When their cameras malfunctioned, when their batteries died, when they fled screaming from the basement, they hadn't been chased out by ghosts. They had been forced away, repelled by the guardians trying to protect them from opening the wrong door. And now, standing shackled in the black water, staring at the door trembling in its frame, Arif knew the truth that reframed everything. Lawang Sewu's 1,000 doors weren't all meant to be walked through. Some of them weren't doors at all, they were cages, and he had found one. Arif yanked at the shackle one last time, his wrist slick with blood. The metal screeched before finally snapping free, the rust giving way. He stumbled forward into the black water, splashing wildly as he forced himself toward the stairs. The basement shook behind him, the swollen wooden door pounding with violent force. Each slam echoed like thunder, rattling the walls, sending waves across the water that nearly knocked him off his feet. The voices rose again, hundreds of whispers layering into one deafening chorus. Some screamed warnings, others begged, others only wailed in endless grief. Arif's legs burned as he trudged through the rising water, every step feeling heavier, as though unseen hands clutched at his ankles. At the staircase, he hauled himself upward, coughing, gasping, his flashlight still dead in his hand. Behind him, the pounding stopped. Silence fell so sudden it made his ears ring. He dared to glance back only once. The door stood still again, closed, but the scratches seemed deeper now, fresh. He ran, through the endless corridors, past the rows of doors that all looked the same, through the grand arches that had felt like a labyrinth designed to keep him trapped. Somehow, this time, he reached the exit. He burst into the night air, collapsing on the stone steps outside, chest heaving, lungs burning. The streets of Semarang were silent. The war memorial glowed faintly in the distance, indifferent to what still throbbed beneath the earth. Arif's shaking hand reached for his phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. The screen lit up, though he hadn't touched it. A single notification appeared. It read, "One door is open." Arif dropped the phone, staring wide-eyed back at the towering facade of Lawang Sewu. Its 1,000 windows glimmered in the moonlight, and for a heartbeat, he swore he saw movement in the highest one. A figure, watching, waiting. The building stood silent, its doors sealed tight. But Arif knew the truth. Something inside was no longer locked away, and in a place of 1,000 doors, all it takes is one to never close again. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.